Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining our Dion Leadership webinar series today. Our topic today is going to be harnessing the power of behavioral pre-hire assessments and predictive analytics, reduce turnover and identify more high potential employees. Joining us today is going to be Steve Dion, founder and CEO of Dion Leadership, along with Allison Ford, VP of Partnerships from TalentClick. And now I'll pass it on to Steve to get us started today.
Thanks, Abby. I appreciate the introduction and welcome everybody. Thanks for spending a little bit of time with us today. I appreciate you joining one of our webinars. And this topic this month we've chosen is about harnessing the power of behavioral assessments, and specifically to reduce turnover and identify more high potential employees. And for those of you that have been on our webinars before, you know that we try to pick topics that are relevant to what's going on in the world in the HR talent development space. And sometimes we invite a guest speaker, sometimes somebody else at Dion Leadership will speak. And this month we wanted to bring in a partner that's an expert in this. And I just want to share with you a little bit about Dion Leadership before I turn it over to Allison Ford to lead our presentation today. Allison, next slide. So for those of you that don't know Dion Leadership, what we're about is to help organizations create situations where employees can start every day excited and end every day accomplished. And we're really passionate about what are those conditions to create that. Many times that's around the leadership and the role that somebody's in, but it's also, in this particular case, about making sure that the right people join the organization. And we try to pride ourselves in doing a lot of thought leadership. If you may have been following us recently, you see we're doing a lot of publishing with Fast Company magazine, and we've been winning some awards in our space of leadership and OD, and are always trying to think what's next. And this last couple of years, you can imagine with COVID, this pandemic, with the changes in the work world, it's really changed the way we think about leadership and talent development. These are the areas in which we operate in terms of our business. Many of you may know us for individual coaching, leadership development, team development. I've seen some of the registrants on our list for today, and we do a lot of work in that space, but we also do a lot of work in talent assessment, and that's what this is really about today. And it's both in terms of the work that we do with our IO psychology team and helping you assess senior executives, but also to vet and bring in the right tools that you can use in your organization. And that's where our partnership with TalentClick came in, and why I asked Allison to speak today. These are some of the clients that we work with. And as you can see here, many of them are large, complex, many in manufacturing and healthcare, professional services, but these are organizations that are making hiring decisions every single day. Lots of decisions, some good, some not, and they need predictive tools to make better decisions and to grow their workforce in a planful and proactive way. And that's what brings us to our topic today, is how to help you do that. So I'm here to introduce Allison Ford. I've known Allison for a few years now, and we've had a partnership with TalentClick as an organization for many years. And Allison has about 20 years of experience in the talent acquisition and HR consulting space. And we, as many of you know, we use lots of different partners in terms of vendors to bring in tools and resources. But I particularly asked Allison and TalentClick to come and talk to us today because I feel like they have one of the best approaches to thinking about this work, both analytically and practically. And Allison has spent the last 12 years really working with large organizations in this talent acquisition space. So I want to give most of our time today to Allison. I'll be kind of jumping in and monitoring this throughout. And as we go through our talk today, feel free to put information in the chat. I know some of the folks that are on the webinar today are current users of the tool. And if you have any suggestions or tools or comments about it, would love you to chime in. And also, if you have any questions, please add those in here, and we'll make sure we have some time at the end, or if it's germane at the moment, I'll pause with Allison and then we'll get some questions answered. So Allison, we'll give it over to you to talk about our agenda and lead us in our conversation today.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Steve, for inviting me to be part of this today. I'm excited to be here, and our partnership has been fantastic over the years, as you've said. So in today's session, I want to assure all of you we're going to identify how pre-hire assessments can help you. So looking at strengths and risks before you hire so that you can save time, increase job and organizational fit. And ideally, the goal is here to reduce turnover, training costs, and help you screen in more candidates in this really tricky, challenging time we're in right now. We'll give you some good background on the science and how to choose assessments that are validated for selection, because not all are, and even look at some personality traits for work from home or hybrid success, because that is quite a timely challenge too. We'll give lots of time for questions, and then also have opportunity for a trial offer here, how you can try Talent Click for yourself here at the end. So to give you assurance you're in the right hands, Talent Click is a global leader in psychometrics. So we're used by leaders in over 100 countries and 25 languages. And really, our science is applied to all different environments. So we work in healthcare, manufacturing, insurance, with a lot of transportation companies. So for instance, every bus driver in the city of Chicago is using Talent Click. So rest assured that your sector and your environment can really be a good fit for these tools. And we really want to find out how much experience you may have with assessments. So Abby, if you can put up the poll here, this is a quick question for you to let us know.
If we could just take about 20 seconds here, we'll leave this open and answer where you're at related to assessments right now. Do you use them regularly? Do you use them somewhat? You don't use them at all, but you're thinking about it? Or really you're saying, I'm listening, but my organization is like not into this. Just want to get a sense of where people are at right now and how they use assessments for pre-hire. Okay, let's close the poll. And it looks like we have most people on the call, Allison, say no, about 50% say no, but we're considering using them in the future. And 27% use them regularly. So would love to hear from that group. And then some have somewhat or have used them in the past is another 27%. So great. That's a great list of folks. And for those that haven't used them, I know we're going to talk about sort of the guts of the what's and whys as well. And at the end, offer you a tool to say, how do you vet assessment vendors to know what tool would fit your particular needs and organization? So listen in for that.
Exactly. Yeah. Thanks, Steve. It is really helpful to know that we're quite an even split then between people who have used assessments before and who haven't. So, to understand then where you're at, 76% of organizations with more than 100 employees do rely on assessment tools such as aptitude and personality tests for external hiring, and that's really growing. There's the trend to use all sorts of analytics tools to make better decisions in our organizations and have that business intelligence. So assessments are one tool at your disposal. And really 82% of Fortune 500 companies now are using pre-employment testing in their recruitment strategies. So definitely those of you who are currently using assessments, you're on the right track. And we'll cover some basics for those of you who want to dip your foot in the water. So the pandemic has also added layers of challenge in everything we do, but certainly accelerated the need for how to assess new skills in the workforce. And what's interesting is we're seeing a special focus on social and emotional skills. The proportion of companies addressing empathy and interpersonal skills has doubled. So yes, technical skills and hard skills are still challenging to find, but sometimes in a candidate shortage and during the pandemic, you may have to stretch outside of someone who ticks every box on your list. And you really want to make sure you find people who have the soft skills that make a good fit. So here's the why of assessing personality. Why would you invest the time and the dollars in assessing personality? And it's really to help achieve certain goals. So some of our customers have come to us with a goal of boosting performance. So we've worked with State Farm, who was able to decrease employee turnover by over 20%. And in doing so, increase sales, increase renewals, and customer satisfaction. So they met their goals, which was fantastic. Others come from more of a safety or industrial environment and may want to reduce safety incidents and reduce risk. And so anywhere from about 15 to 20% reduction in incidents is what we see, which is a lot of cost saving and saving lives often. Another is reducing turnover. That's a big focus we've got here today. And so we worked with an international security guard organization, and they were challenged with finding the right people who would stay in the job longer. We helped them create an ideal profile and hire people who are a little different than what they had been looking for. And by finding people who are more conventional and contented, apprehensive, looking at those kinds of personality traits, they've found that people stay in the job 40% longer. And you can imagine, if you're in that HR seat or hiring manager role, that really reduces some of the headaches for you.
And Allison, this is why that last one was why I wanted to bring this topic to our community today. Is one of the things I'm seeing is that a lot of our clients are saying our 90-day turnover is out of control. Our 120-day turnover is out of control. And so we're having to run, multiple new hire onboarding programs, and they're not even through the program, or they have to find non-traditional people and say, I can't find people in my market to do this work. So I'm hiring somebody and investing a lot more to train them because they haven't done the job. And that even takes another barrier of entry. So if you're not hiring for the right personality or the temperament to be able to learn that work, it's even more of a challenge now than it was pre-COVID days.
Well, exactly. And the other piece is you may not be able to meet someone in person before deciding to hire them. And so to have a tool that helps you dig deeper when you're really building that virtual relationship in some ways is really important. So I agree with you 100%, Steve. Okay, so let's dig into some of the foundational pieces of personality assessments. So the what is personality is something that we need to cover here. And that is really how we are hardwired. We are all different. We understand that people are different, but really the power of how that guides us in our behaviors and our choices on the job is really a factor that cannot be ignored. And this is what we mean by personality traits, something like how dominant someone may naturally be, or how empathetic, spontaneous, or calm. So when I'm speaking of personality traits, these are the kinds of things that may come to mind. Something like rule resistance. You really would like to know before hiring someone if that is their natural go-to, is to resist the rules. So we assess the differences in on-the-job behavior, but we predict that in advance. So these differences can be measured, and they allow for person job fit and person organization fit, the two factors you really need to consider. And we're not trying to change someone's personality, but what we can do is help change behaviors. So before someone understands their own personality, they have a natural impulse and take an action. But with self-awareness, coaching, personalized guidance, someone can make a different choice. So there may be someone who is very impulsive, for example, or distractible. And with this self-awareness can take a breath and try to focus more and have better outcomes on the job. Here are, the lists of what we are trying to achieve. So we are looking for some positive outcomes on the left: quality of hire, improved culture and engagement, productivity, performance, and retention. And at the same time, reducing those management challenges, counterproductive behaviors, safety incidents, and risks, and reducing that turnover. So we typically see people able to reduce turnover by about 20% by putting these assessments in place as one more data point in decision making. Let's talk about the costs. And that is really, when you have a wrong fit, some of the costs are obvious and some are quite hidden. But you need to look at compensation, the time spent, recurring interviewing, onboarding, and then the lost productivity, even culture and morale, or customer dissatisfaction and brand. And the rule of thumb is that average turnover is equal to just whatever you would have spent on that person. It walks out the door with them when they leave, and it can be significantly higher for management or revenue generation roles. If we look in addition at those environments where safety is a concern, the medical injuries, productivity losses, shutdowns, property damage, again, adds additional costs that really can make or break an organization. Looking at healthcare, cost of hiring the wrong fit. This is a fantastic study by Visier Analytics, who's a leader in predictive data and the power to bring to decisions. And they looked at cost of turnover in healthcare for a very large organization. And on average, the cost of turnover per employee was $40,000. When you looked at nurses, it was $90,000 per nurse who didn't turn out and walked out the door. When they looked at reducing turnover by 10% per year, they projected within 3 years there would be $14.7 million savings for their client. And the bottom line of the report is reducing turnover represented a significant savings opportunity. So again, we're looking at the differences we can make for people. And we're also looking at the differences we can make for costs and time and savings for organizations. You can ask yourself the question, when a new employee doesn't work out, we estimate it costs us an average of X. And you should know that when you are making any sort of decision. So remember to add up some of the less obvious costs, like the time spent in recruitment, training, onboarding, setup, etc. So the challenge here is, as people, traditional interviewing has only a 50% success rate of hiring a top performer. It's a coin toss. And that's because interviews are usually non-standardized. We as people have a lot of unconscious biases that interfere with making the best decision. And interview is a performance. Again, when we talked about that case study of the International Security Guard Company, they were hiring the people who interviewed the best, but those weren't necessarily the people who performed best in the role and were proud to have that job as a long-term career. So interviews are also talking about the past. What did you do in your last job? And looking at the present. How are you showing up in front of me here today? But what's missing is looking again in the rearview mirror. You've got that checked, but you need to predict the future. So another case study here, super interesting for us to dig into this with a global restaurant chain, well-known, very busy. And they had a real challenge with turnover. Their turnover was over 100%, and yet they did not consider that their number one challenge. They came to us looking for a way to identify their future leaders from the first touch of interaction with an applicant. Then they tagged their high potential workers, so people who were entering at more of an entry level, and estimated who they wanted to put into their leadership program, their high performer program. We did the data analysis on those who actually were high performers, and they only guessed correctly 37% of the time. So that meant that they were looking at people who did well in the role they were hired for, with good empathetic, accommodating, outgoing traits. But in their environment, interesting to see that those who performed well as managers were more direct, a little bit resistant, and more reserved. Very, very good on the operations side of the business. So what happened was we used the data analysis and put in front of them 41 new leaders they had overlooked that they needed to consider for their high performer program. And they've been thrilled with the results of that. So the data really overcame some of their biases. So the advantage here then is using this tool. You can see what's beneath the water. In an interview, you can only see what lies above the surface, but digging deep, you can see how someone would act when no one's watching, what their values are, and really predict their future potential. So that's tied to helping you hire that right fit. And so managers say they're more likely to hire that person again. They gave higher performance ratings, and employees were happier with their job because, again, it was the right fit for them. So greater satisfaction. And overall, and this isn't our stat, but this is in general, businesses that use pre-hire assessments are 36% more likely than all others to be satisfied with new hires. So Steve, does that line up with some of what you're seeing in your years in the business?
Yes, it does, Allison. But it's interesting, and I think the statistics you showed up front about how many organizations are using pre-hire assessments, it's still shocking to me as we do work with the clients that we work with, which are some big, long-standing organizations, and even 50% of the folks on the call today don't use assessment still. And it's honestly, I come out of HROD. I've been doing this work for 30 years, and I'm just a big believer in this. I've always talked it up, even when we're doing leadership training or coaching or other aspects of our business, and finding that organizations just still feel like they want to keep it open, or I know better. And with big data available, it still kind of shocks me that organizations wouldn't use this type of information to make better choices in many instances, which is their largest line item of cost is payroll.
Yeah, I agree. And having used assessments now for the last dozen years, I won't interview someone without an assessment, and I won't, really even enter into a performance conversation without first checking someone's assessment so I can personalize my approach. And not having something like that, it feels like I'm kind of going with one eye blind or an arm tied behind my back now that I'm used to having these insights. So I really looking forward to hearing from some others on the call.
The other thing I hear sometimes too, Allison, is people aren't using them because they found an assessment that they used in a past life and they didn't know how to use it, or it wasn't a good tool.
Right.
And maybe it was descriptive, but it didn't look at person job fit. So as we go through this, I hope the audience kind of understands the value of not just like looking at a whole bunch of information. Like, isn't it interesting that this person, is highly directive or highly empathetic or this or that, but so what? To what end? How does it fit the job and the role? So if you've used the wrong tool, then they've said these don't work, versus saying maybe they didn't implement it right, they weren't using it right. Can you talk a little bit too about kind of how much of the decision making in the hiring process an analytical tool like this should be?
Yes, absolutely. That's great. If the tool isn't the right one to get the job done, it doesn't mean the job doesn't need to get done. It means go find a better power tool. And so this is right what we're going to dive into here now. Because when you are making a choice, you must consider these 6 areas. So number 1 is the type of tool. Normative versus ipsative. So there's a lot of fluff out on the market, and maybe some assessments that are fun for people to do, but aren't scientifically proven for the use case you have. Ipsative assessments, some are very, very well respected, but they are not validated for hiring. They are ones that ask forced questions. So I am either A or B. So they give categorical results. So I'm an introvert or I'm an extrovert. And they can really indicate someone's orientation within themselves and maybe be good for team building or personal development, but not for hiring. What you need to look for is a normative assessment. And these are scaled questions because, again, everything is really on a spectrum, on a dimension. And so it's answering questions like, I strongly disagree or I agree, to give you just those results that are a bit like a bell curve, where an average adult person would be at about the 50% mark. And you can be more than average on a trait or a bit lower than average on a trait. And it is, again, let's use extroversion as an example. So I'm more extroverted than average, or I'm less extroverted. It's all about what is the right fit for that job, but it helps you see how this person would interact compared to others relative to group data. And that is best for selection. Succession planning, training, development, and team building also validated for that. You want a tool that's valid and reliable, that the science is sound. So ask these questions when you're talking to a vendor. So you want something that is reliable across time and gives you the proof that there is a low degree of error. And then the validity helps you, again, make sure that it measures what it says it's going to measure. So ask these questions. As Steve said, we can provide you with a checklist of questions to ask a vendor when you're choosing a tool. You want a tool that's fair. No adverse impact means there's not going to be a significant difference in the assessment results by different groups of the population. The exception may be if there are cognitive assessments, which aren't behavioral. It's not about personality, but it's more about mental horsepower. And you may need to give some special considerations for different population groups there. But ask about that no adverse impact to make sure that you're meeting or exceeding those EEOC guidelines. Faking potential is what we call it, is do you get a flag when someone has been gaming the assessment? If they've either exaggerated their responses to be more favorable, or if they were so distracted when they did the assessment that it's not really a valid test taking. You want to get alerted to that. Of course, and especially in some environments like healthcare, privacy and data security has to be top of mind. Look at informed consent and make sure that there's explicit permission granted from a participant to collect the information, that you're not asking invasive questions. Some assessments built years ago still ask terribly personally intrusive questions that are no longer allowed to be asked. Make sure that you meet the requirements. We work around the world, so the EU has some of the most stringent privacy and data security levels for us to meet. And we also are FIPA compliant for working with government, Crown Corps, et cetera. We store data securely on US and Canadian servers. And then finally, ask questions about administration. This is like boots on the ground stuff. How affordable is it? How easy is it to use? How much training would I need? Is this automated, scalable? Is it, what level of readability is it at? Most of our assessments are start at about a 4th grade reading level, so they are accessible to people who may not even have English as their first language. Can I customize or integrate? So again, we can help you with a checklist. It's a lot to consider, but this helps you make sure you're choosing a tool that will be right for you.
And for me, Allison, this is a really important part that sometimes people overlook. Like, how long does a candidate take to take an assessment? Some are built where it's just too labor intensive. And then also, what do the reports look like? Sometimes the output of the reports are in psychometric, PhD language of, personality traits that somebody doesn't know how to turn that into something that's actionable for a job.
Yeah, for sure. That ease of use for both the participant who's doing the assessment, right? That you want to take down any barriers to them to say no to your organization when you're competing with other organizations, but for your own team. It should be that you don't need, to do a week-long training course to know how to get the value out of the assessments, for sure. So this is a snapshot of what that checklist looks like. We actually have a whole guide walking you through the questions you need to ask yourselves for helping you select the right vendor. Steve, you wanted to jump in and tell me a bit about one of your stories.
Great. So one of our clients, Dexco, is a large global manufacturing company. And we were doing leadership development programs for them for a couple of years, and they came to us and said, we're buying these other companies, we're growing fast, we have some leadership standards, and we're looking to bring in some assessments. And so we help them think about the right tools that are out there in the marketplace. And like many organizations, different senior leaders said, well, I use this tool in my previous organization, I liked that, we should use this. Even if it may not fit this culture, it's like, I like what I know. So we had to kind of vet through different tools and different processes. And then they came down to deciding to use TalentClick. And I didn't want to, show a whole bunch of data today, because I know I want to talk through the science behind this in general. But what to me was a litmus test. So we've been doing this now for almost a year. And then recently I went to one of their larger manufacturing sites for a trip to talk about our leadership development programs. And their senior line leaders are saying how much they like the tool, how much they want to use this for their senior team, for people that are already in the organization to take the assessment. They're starting to use this language in and around the organization. And for folks that are super busy in a day-to-day production environment, who aren't HR talent acquisition people sitting all day thinking about talent people, for their senior leaders to say, I'm finding value in this tool, I want to use it, it helps me come to the table with knowing what questions to ask, because there's interview questions baked into this. It's making my job easier, and B, it's something that I can sort of see tangibly the behaviors, so I can coach to those. I have no doubt we could sit here in a year from now and say, we can show a whole bunch of
Mhm.
reduced turnover and increased promotions and things that will come out of it. But just in terms of the setup and the onboarding of it, for those organizations that are out there going, can I get my senior team to do this? Like, and want to do it, and to not be fighting, you know, the line hiring manager to use this in the organization. If you use the right tool, they will appreciate it.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for that, Steve. I love hearing that. And it is about helping your team have a tool that makes their job easier. Give them fewer headaches and more confidence. And yeah, you're set. So that's great. Thank you very much for sharing that. Okay, so we're going to dive into our next section here, looking at what assessments to use. So behavioral assessments, really think about soft skills. That's often how we talk about it. Soft skills are those behaviors, traits, work habits like collaboration, drive, adaptability, communication, dependability, time management, perseverance, or attention to detail. And think about someone who hasn't worked out in the past. Chances are it is due to a lack of the right soft skills. And so our friends at LinkedIn here say that that's what they're hearing from recruiters of when a hire doesn't work out. Really look at those soft skills. These are examples of the solutions that we do. And so on the left, I'm going to show you a couple examples of the attitude and values profiling that we do with work style, work values, safety and risk, even driver safety. So those look at behaviors and personality traits. Leadership profiles, cognitive quotients, English proficiency testing, those can look at some hard skills. We'll talk about those briefly as well, because it's important too to make sure that you're looking at everything that may be needed for success. So my note at the bottom there is that you could also add in job simulations or technical testing for pre-hire testing, but we're going to talk mostly about those on the left side for behavioral soft skills today. An example would be looking at someone's achievement orientation. How focused are they on achieving goals? Are they contented? Are they achievement focused? But where in that line do they fit? Where on that dimension do they land? An example of values would be how coachable is someone? How likely are they to respond positively to suggestions and improve their behaviors? And if you're looking at safety risk, how accommodating is someone to making a change, and how perhaps resistant are they to following safety protocol? You need to know that so that you can hire people that fit and also support people's strengths and help fill their gaps as a manager. Now, we have what we call an AVP report summary. So it takes 10 to 15 minutes to do the survey. And from that, we generate a wide variety of results: work style and performance, work values and attitude, and safety and risk tolerance. So you can assess those three areas all in one survey. The report looks a bit like this. The top section is blue and it lays out the different dimensions. And that starburst marker is where someone's score lands on the spectrum. So very visual, very easy to see. Then we personalize interview questions. So again, when you're talking to any vendor, ask them, do you provide personalized interview questions based on someone's results? And our suggestion is that these be behavioral based questions. So if someone was impatient, their score was impatient, they would perhaps be offered to the hiring manager questions to probe into impatience. Or if they scored as quite reserved, here are some behavioral based questions, like give me an example when you were in a situation when communicating with someone was challenging. What was the situation? How did you handle that? So if all of us did the assessment, we have different personalities, we'd have different results. The interview questions generated would be different, so that you can probe in deeper and make better decisions based on the answers you get. Also ask if you get management considerations and coaching tips provided to each applicant. And I like to look at these in a pre-hire setting. I don't put these away until I decide if I hire someone and then look at how to manage them. I want to preview, what would it be like for me to have this person on my team? How would it be to manage them? And what are some things I would need to consider to support them and get the best performance and productivity? So make sure that you've got those present. And again, in easy to read, easy to action language. Then post-hire, you've decided who you want to hire. how can I have the supports I need for training and coaching of each individual? And the assessments we provide, again, you can have a workbook that might be something to sit down as a one-on-one employee development workbook, or post-incident discussion workbook, and some quick reference guides to help people get to know how to use them.
And Allison, let me just stop real quick.
Sure.
Give you another thought here is part of why I think this is important to focus in on in terms of retention and performance is if we're using tools like this, it slows an organization down to first say, what do we even need in a job? If you have that spectrum of items, to be able to stop and say, what's going to help somebody be successful here? And obviously, hopefully you're going to use that tool to hire right, but also this realistic preview of you hire the person and then be able to say, hey, this is a rub point for you. We chose to hire you, but over the next 6 months, this is something you might encounter. That'll keep them in and staying with the organization because you've helped kind of talk about the language of this is an area where you might need to do a little bit of stretching. You know, we're not going to hire somebody where the rubber band has to stretch so much they break, but knowing that that's what the journey the person's on will likely help them stay with the organization to be more productive.
Exactly. So assess potential, fit, and long-term fit. So it is not can you do the job, but will you do the job, and will you do the job well? You're right. Yeah, absolutely. And you know, back to your point about making sure you're looking at the traits that are relevant for that job. We call that competency mapping, and we have guides to help people look through what competencies does this job require and what traits are related to those competencies, so that, again, you know where to look. Great. Briefly, Steve, we thought talking about cognitive or hard skills is valuable as well here. So what we call our cognitive quotient, which we know people have an IQ, we know EQ is, you know, that emotional intelligence. Well, there's a cognitive quotient here as well. And it looks at the hard skills people have for numerical, verbal, and mechanical abilities and capabilities. So that is an assessment that can be used for some frontline labor positions. Again, anyone that is in more of a mechanical role. And this one is good for frontline workers. So it's geared to that entry level, but we have advanced ones as well. English proficiency looks at vocabulary, error identification, typing speed, typing accuracy, great for customer service administration roles. We work with a lot of emergency services organizations, and they do typing test for some of their 911 operators using this too. And then leadership, you know, look beyond the soft skills and look also at some business reasoning, verbal and numerical reasoning. And conflict style is important too. So if someone is obliging, avoiding, dominating, that's on the behavioral side, but layer in some of those business reasoning hard skills. Great. So let's talk about best practices for implementing assessments so that you've got some takeaways here. Usually we see a 5-step process for implementing assessments. Again, it should be simple for you, and it should be very straightforward. If it gets too complicated, it's not something that your managers are going to want to do. So we look at determining the ideal profile, then collecting results, analyzing them, and then using them to screen and interview and coach and develop. So 5 easy steps.
And Allison, we particularly had a question that came in about the role profiling piece, like specifically was, is each assessment built per role, or is there a standard assessment, and how would we use it in talent acquisition to determine the traits for that role, or is it from a menu of traits? So let me just give you that as you go through this, you can speak to that.
Perfect. Okay, perfect timing, Steve, because this is what we call benchmarking, is how do you determine that ideal profile of traits? So you have to ask yourself questions. What does it take to excel in this role? Again, we have guides for mapping these competencies, and you look at what kind of person would be a good fit. What do they need beyond skills and experience? What kind of person historically has not fit in this job? What traits cause that person not to succeed? And map your competencies to traits from there. Then what you do is ask yourself, do we have to consider things like work from home, remote or hybrid? And we know some work style traits to consider would be how spontaneous or regimented someone is for their time management, how reserved to outgoing they are for working independently or feeling lonely and isolated from their team. Look at work values for responsibility and open communication if they're having to work from home or remote a lot. And work risk traits. You need a natural tendency for focus for people who would be working from home. So again, you're asking yourself about the environment for helping set people up for success, but also looking at the job. And then from there, help make a benchmark. We guide you through that, and a good vendor should, but you look at the target score ranges that would predict the likelihood of success and have a standard point of reference to reduce bias. It really is a comparison that you can then use for all internal and external candidates. This is what it looks like for us. Is we saw those reports earlier that had the starburst. Now you see a report with a line on it and where that person's score falls compared to the line. The line is the ideal range of each of those traits. The starburst, you can see if it falls on the line, they're within that range. If the starburst is off the line, they're out of range. We calculate what we call a fit score at the top and color code it like traffic lights. So this person scored an 83 out of 100 for their healthcare, personal care attendant role. And green means go. This person should be moved forward. Now, the benefit of a benchmark is, again, it reduces that bias and error and saves you time. It is a reliable indicator. Steve, one question you asked earlier was, how much should I weigh these insights in my decision making? We say up to a third. So a third can be based on some of your other best practices. So continue interviewing, continue reference checks, background screening, asking good questions in interviews about experience. But this is your predictive piece, the missing third. You can use this to help you decide if you move someone forward or not. Then a best practice number 2 is to assess early in the process, again, to manage that internal unconscious bias that we have. Assess every candidate in pre-screen, pre-interview stage, internal and external, so that you are fair and less biased. And it's best to communicate the purpose behind the assessment. We care about finding employees who fit. And one of the ways we do that is with a behavioral assessment. Now, ours is 10 to 15 minutes. So you then would ask someone or send them a link to do the assessment.
I think this assessing every candidate is a really important part too. And one of the things I wanted to bring up and why I particularly like the talent click model is using a subscription-based model versus a pay per assessment model drives an organization to say, let me put this early on in the process. So I'm not just assessing somebody because I feel like they don't fit. And then I'm going to look at this assessment. I'm going to talk myself into how to make that 1/3 score worth 5% and not use it or overuse it. And then that's where I've seen in the past organizations say the tool didn't work for me. It's because the tool might have been a great tool. They just didn't use it properly.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And we all know that what makes a good salesperson may not make a good sales manager. Remember that restaurant example where by using the data, they could identify additional potential leaders that they had overlooked. What makes a good accountant may not make, a good director of marketing. And so those benchmarks are very important to look at that job fit, but also, especially on the value side, what a good fit would be for your organization. We have a benchmark library. So if you don't know what that benchmark would look like for a certain role, you just look it up in our library, and then you could customize it too for exactly your scenario if you like, by testing your high performers, and then you can compare other candidates to what has worked for you before. The assessment process, no barriers. You really don't want to put something in the way of someone going through your workflow or saying yes to your organization. So make it easy to automatically send out a link or manually send out a link to someone to do the assessment. Shouldn't take them long. They should be able to do it on any device, do it in a language of their choice or the choice for you. No adverse impact. And then the scoring should be very quick. Results right now with the technology we have at our fingertips should be quite immediate. And then again, stored securely. So make it easy for your side and also easy for the person to complete. Then you get the reports to analyze them. So reports should show strengths and areas for fit, but also uncover risks and areas of concern. So again, give you that preview of what's lying beneath the water so that you can compare people for the role. Remember, the data is objective, so there are no good or bad scores. There are no good or bad people. This is about fit to job and fit to the organization. There are positive and negative aspects for any profile. Our reports are written in positive language, so everyone gets strengths and everyone does get some areas to help them develop. Fit really depends on job and environment. So best practice 4 is when hiring, how to screen and interview candidates. So this, again, to save time, the fit scores, benchmarks help you rank, order, and prioritize. Spend your time first on those who seem like they would be a good fit. Flag for candidates to proceed with caution. So I told you that fit score is like traffic lights at the top. You might see a red. That's someone who would score 25 or below out of 100. Yellow would be mid-range. Proceed with caution, just like you would a yellow light on the road. And then helps consider candidates who might have been overlooked. If you see someone green and they weren't rated highly in the interview, ask yourself what's going on. Does this job require someone to interview well? Or what are we missing here? Don't necessarily use it, again, as a knockout for candidates or as a pass-fail. So Steve, I know you were saying in your experience that 1/3 of a hiring decision is what is statistically and scientifically validated by us, and a good rule of thumb that I know you've been using too. So example of fit score here for a warehouse supervisor, and you can even have more than one fit score on our report. So you could compare someone to more than one job at a time, if you like. How would they look to be a therapist compared to a personal care attendant? And again, you can see by the different colors, it helps managers know how to action at really just a quick look here. So we also suggest you can use the insights for reference checks, asking targeted questions to directly probe into areas of concern and increase your predictive power of someone who would be helpful on the job. So this candidate, did they initiate contact with new people? How did they handle this? That's likely going to be asked for someone who would be reserved or maybe a bit anxious. This is the kind of question that would be flagged for you to ask. Best practice 5 for developing is how to train and coach employees. And I can tell you that especially these younger generations coming up, they want a personalized approach to mentoring, coaching, management, development. So we offer an employer report for an employer to have eyes on an individual, but we also offer participant reports. And these are ones that you can hand over to employees for their own self-awareness, self-development, or use it as a conversation guide between supervisor and employee. And this one is for leadership profiling, but also for our attitude, value, personality, AVP combo I showed you before. We have participant reports for those as well. You can even take it to the next level using data analytics for team building. So instead of looking at one person at a time, this is a way to have a map. Each dot here is one person. So you can look at a group of people at a time. So you can see patterns in the data and understand just better business intelligence. What are the team's strengths? What are potential challenges? Where are they aligned and complementary? Is that going to be a good thing for us, or do we need more variety on the team? Where are blind spots, potential challenges, tensions? Have a look. And then just in closing here, again, a best practice is always to evaluate and learn. Understand what you're seeing and reflect on, are we choosing the right traits? Are we implementing this in the right way in our workflow? So we have studied for years the 911 emergency operators in many organizations. We work with police services, government organizations that have these 911 operators. And they came to us, their biggest challenge was looking for success and resilience in this terribly stressful job, that their turnover was quite high and the emotional impact so extreme. So over these years, we have been able to drill down with them what top traits predict success. We started saying what really predicts success in your training program. And then we followed these people on the job for years. And they are now providing us on the job data of, are you a high quality of employee? Are you one who has long tenure? And what were your absenteeism rates? So they provided us with their organizational on the job data. We correlated these traits. And what was very interesting to them is 8 out of the 9 most predictive traits were behavioral. It wasn't about the hard skills, the experience they had. It was about who they were. So verbal reasoning was number 1. They had to process all these different inputs, but they also had to be the person who was responsible, regimented, had open communication. They were patient, coachable, a bit apprehensive, a little bit dominant to be able to have that call control, and then were achievement focused, wanting to do their best every day. So personality could not be ignored. Behavior can be predicted. And we did help them understand how to weigh this as 30% of their hiring decision. So it's been extremely impactful. We did a joint presentation at a national conference for emergency communicators, and it's really helped them protect their people and have less challenges with that resilience piece. Yeah, really tough these days. So quick review, and then we're into Q&A. We talked about benefits and results and how to choose an assessment, consider the traits and build a benchmark for different roles, how that helps you determine fit during the hiring process and beyond. And ideally, then you're looking at these results that we talked about in the beginning. You're getting that return on investment, saving costs, having higher quality, and people who are sticking and staying. Fewer headaches, better behaviors, fewer incidents, and lower turnover. So that's the magic piece that we're looking for here. So let's dive into some questions, Steve. We've got about those 10 minutes left, just
Perfect.
like we said. So,
yeah, your timing was right on, Allison. Good. Great. And I have a couple questions that have come in. I'm monitoring the chat. So if anybody else, now that you've seen what we are covering, if you have any questions, please add it to the chat and we'll cover that. And then at the end, walk you through if you're interested in how to get the assessment, and kind of try one out as a user experience. We'll connect you with that as well. A couple questions though. One is, there was a comment about how well this can be used for diversity and inclusion efforts too. And of course, on the surface, right, you can say, hey, we don't want people to sort of look at the color of somebody's skin and infer things, and a scientific assessment like this can help do that. But can you talk a little bit more about how you are finding organizations using this, particularly to advance their DEI efforts?
Yeah, for sure. So the first example that pops to mind is that we work with a university-led healthcare organization. And they were challenged in finding the surgical residents that were a good fit for their program and wanting to build out the diversity on their selection with this unbiased objective piece. So by using the assessments, they have come back to us telling us that they now have their most diverse team that they've ever had. And the reason they see is that the science really doesn't care about gender, about where you were born, about your skin color, your height. It really helps identify that best potential and open people's eyes to those who may be overlooked, even in a system that doesn't understand the unconscious bias at play.
Awesome, great answer. I totally see that as well. And even in seeing the data before you interview, knowing what questions you might ask may be different than the questions you would have asked if you just experienced this person kind of on the screen or in front of you. You already start with those biases.
That's right.
Can you talk a little bit about creating the role job fit profile? Like, you have the benchmarks available. How many candidates does it take for you to say, hey, for your organization, we can see if, a nurse at this place is the same as a nurse here. So it's kind of a two-part question. One is, how much data does it take to kind of create a customized benchmark, like what you talked about with the 911 operator? Sort of you kind of have a general sense of this job, but it's not a regular call center, right? 911 is a different beast.
Yeah.
And how much does culture play in to the benchmark of, a production supervisor in general versus a production supervisor at a company with a specific set of cultural attributes they're trying to bring in?
Yeah, fantastic. So first part, how many people to assess? Our benchmark library is based on a large pool, but you're right, it is quite broad. So if you want to customize from there, we usually want you to look at least 20 to 30 people. Ideally, those are 20 to 30 top performers to see what they have in common. But if not, we ask you to do sort of quality ratings. If you have 20 people to assess, help us understand who you see as high performer, average performer, or low performer. And we can build a customized benchmark from that. More is better. So in some of these organizations, they're assessing 100 top performers or 200 top performers. But the thing with these benchmarks is they can be tweaked. So culture does play a piece. That's why we would suggest that perhaps you look at some of those values traits that your top performers have in common, not just their work style or risk tolerance traits. But what can also make a difference is the supply and demand, the market you're in, right? Is that your top performers you might have the pick of the litter where you are, whereas another organization may not. So some organizations that are maybe in rural environments and fewer people to choose from have to have a wider benchmark that more people are going to fit. Or they may have to dip into those people that get a yellow score because they don't have enough green people to choose from. Again, it's eyes wide open, but those are the factors we would encourage you to look at when building those custom benchmarks.
Okay. And then actually the yellow comment leads into the next question about if somebody is outside of a range and you're interviewing with those questions.
Yeah.
How do you decide if it's a coachable item and somebody's going to be out of one range and it's just part of it? Like my analogy of the rubber band, like you can stretch it.
Yeah.
When do you listen and what are you listening for to know this really isn't a right fit?
Right. Good question. So some of that is internal training, is that in any conversation, whether it be an interview or employee development kind of conversations, hopefully you have an understanding in your HR teams and your hiring management leadership teams of sort of what to listen for and how to address what comes up in a conversation. So I would look at internal training for that. With our reports, they do prompt you with questions to ask and some coaching tips to be aware of. But it is up to the individual in that interview to decide, what do I now do with that answer, as you would in any interview situation. So this is an interview guide to have you ask better questions and then make better decisions based on the answers you get. So some coaching and development of your management team saying, wow, now that we have this tool and we're asking better questions, let's talk together about how we will then action what we hear. Again, that's very specific to an organization and an organizational role as to what would be acceptable for that job fit and organization fit.
Great. Well, and back to the case study I mentioned earlier, that's exactly what that organization is saying they want to do now is I'm making better informed choices, and then I can use that for coaching and development and training and perpetuate itself. Well, we're about at the top of the hour, so why don't we close up now?
Sure.
And for those of you that are interested in saying, especially if you're new to the world of pre-hire assessments, you might say, hey, I've taken personality assessments for training. I know Myers-Briggs or whatever. What does this look like? If you want to email us at letstalk@dionleadership.com and let us know that you want to take an assessment, Abby will set you up to take our standard, the AVP one we showed on the screen. If you're particularly interested in the cognitive one, note that you would like that as well, and we could send out a link for both of those, and that would be available for 7 days for you to take the assessment, and then you'll be given the results back after you've taken it. Also, when we send out the replay of the webinar, we're going to send you a how to select an assessment vendor guide that we think would be helpful for you to think about if you're looking at this space and saying, you know, this may or may not be the right tool for us. There are lots of tools on the marketplace. Totally understand it. This can help you make an informed choice. And as always, love to talk about this. You guys, for those of you that know me, know I'm real passionate about leadership and OD and all this. So if you want to grab a phone call and say, what's your experience with assessments, with how would we use this, with what tools, resources, absolutely feel free to set up a call with us. Thank you, Allison, for leading us in this discussion today in a way that's more technical than I could have done. I appreciate all of that. For those of you that like to keep informed with our webinar series, look for our next one. We're going to do a coaching panel. Our next webinar will be 3 of our leadership coaches on a panel discussion with me to kind of unpack what leadership coaching is, what they're seeing from the people they're coaching, and how coaching will look. And then the one after that, we're going to be talking about another set of tools for development related to listening skills, as we think that's really important. So we got a great lineup of future webinars. Please look for those from us. And again, thank you, Allison.
Thank you, Steve. Been a pleasure to be here today. And yes, really happy to continue this great partnership with you. And thank you, everyone, for attending.
Bye-bye.